Welcome to this anthropology lecture on politics. We'll be taking a look at some of the early forms of political organization of humankind. And the key word for these societies we're going to be talking about is egalitarian. Um, the word egalitarian refers to equality. So you might even think of taking that G out and putting a Q in there to help remember. Egalitarian societies do have social differences, and it's clear that some people are different from others, and sometimes their status is a little bit higher or a little bit lower. But the amount of difference is not very big. These are roughly equal societies, and we'll be talking about several different forms they could take in Lecture 8 for Anthropology. So the core of political anthropology is to address how societies of people solve their political problems. Every society has these kinds of problems. How are people going to get food? What's going to be the mechanism by which we do that? How are we going to share it? Are we going to sort of pool our resources together? Are we going to coordinate, which is a very big issue politically? How are we going to protect ourselves? How are we going to, say, defend us from maybe another society up the road who would like to take our food? How will we solve conflicts among ourselves? As you well know, people disagree. They get into fights. They have strong opinions. And humans have to figure out a means for resolving those conflicts. So these are the core of some of the political problems that societies have to figure out. I will say from the psych perspective, particularly evolutionary psych, human beings seem wired for this kind of communal effort. We have a number of neurotransmitters involved in pair bonding. We have some important switches that turn on during adolescence that make us more acutely aware of what others think about us and our relationship to others. So it's very clear in our psychology that we've evolved to be social, to be communal, but that doesn't mean it's going to be an easy process, because you have to figure out who has power, who gets to make the decisions, wield the sword, and decide what's going to happen. Who's got authority and how did they get authority? When do we go to war? When do we make peace? Do we decide to build a nice temple to this God that we believe that exists? These are all the kinds of things that societies have to figure out. And politics is really just the process of resolving those issues. Politics at its basic form is, are we going to choose A or B? Let's disagree, let's fight, let's discuss. Are we going to allocate resources for this or allocate resources for that? How are we going to make decisions in our society? That is at the core of what politics is about. Making a choice over another choice. Power, then, would be the ability to force folks in your society to actually follow that choice. To say, I know that you would prefer to have gone with B, but our community has decided A, and therefore you will go with A. Or kneecaps will be busted. Or whatever happens to be the mechanism you use to coerce people into obeying. In psychology, if you've had me for psych, we've talked about lots of these different mechanisms for obedience, the power of social influence, social norms, making us feel like we've got to do, what the crowd does. The ability to use authority and figures of authority to enforce or compel obedience. And then, of course, there's just the straight up use of power. That is, I will physically make you do what you don't want to do. So how do early societies, like in Egypt and Mesopotamia, in the Americas, in Europe, decide to organize themselves to solve these problems? Well, let's take a look. Roughly, we can see two categories of political organization: the way that you organize your politics and your people, and define the status of people within that political organization, your place in society. One form is called egalitarian, and these are just roughly equal societies where almost everybody has the same amount of social, political power. Not exactly, because we know there are differences between people, differences based on age, differences based on sex. Some people may have a little more than somebody else, but egalitarian societies do not have extremes of social difference. Everybody is roughly the same. Anthropologists talk about two other kinds of groupings that are definitely not equal in nature. And these are rank and stratified societies. There's some disagreement in anthropology about how we should think about these, and also disagreement about terms. You will see in some books centralized and non-centralized societies. You will see terms like rank and stratified. So keep in mind that when you encounter this material, maybe in another course, you might see it talked about in a slightly different way. Rank means that there is social difference in the society. Some people are higher, some people are lower, but it appears that the access to resources is roughly the same. That if you were up here, the person down here could access resources to move themselves up. So there's a clear ranking, clear status, but that is still open for people to move up or down in the society. Your position's not fixed. In a stratified society, there are clear social and economic inequalities where some people down here are flat out denied the chance of rising up. If they want to rise up, they get smacked down. So the stratified society has a mechanism or multiple mechanisms for denying people the chance of moving up. You can't move up. Sorry, you got to stay down. It might help if you think of the word stratified based on its root word. Strata, plural of stratum, means layers. So think of it as like layers, maybe in a cake. And some people are on top, they're the frosting of society, and all those other people are just never going to rise up and be there with the frosting folks. So in egalitarian societies, then, you have very rough relative equality where everyone's not perfectly equal. Clearly, some people might be slightly more elevated than others, but there aren't any barriers to resources and there aren't any barriers to status for those who want them. In an egalitarian society, everybody is basically the same. And there's no clear difference between people that can't be can't be surmounted by somebody wanting to get a little better or a little higher status. Doors are not closed to them. Opportunity still exists. Keep in mind, we're never going to say that there aren't differences. There will always be individual differences. Some people are smarter. Some people are more good looking. Some people are faster. Some people are stronger. There always will be differences. But those differences in an egalitarian society don't become a means of keeping other people down. Typically in these kinds of societies, there's no accumulation of goods or property or power. No person gets wealthy and powerful and then stays that way. Goods come and go. Your position might ebb and flow in society. You don't accumulate anything that then you could hand down to your kids and go, see, we're the frosting people. We're way on top of this social cake. And typically, you will find that in many of these societies, reciprocity is a very strong value, meaning that people, if they do something for somebody, it's socially expected that that other person do something in return. And reciprocity has been widely studied by psychologists. There's actually a norm in social relationships and social psych called the reciprocity norm, where we feel obligated to give if someone is given to us. And so these kinds of reciprocal back and forth relationships are very common in egalitarian societies. If we had to compare this to Egypt, ancient Egypt, where we're studying, all of the peoples of the Paleolithic and the sort of early Neolithic would probably be more egalitarian. By the late Neolithic, clearly egalitarianism is going out the window in ancient Egypt and Naqada, for example, particularly by Naqada 2 and 3. But very early on, it looks like, based on what we see in graves in places in ancient Egypt, that people are roughly about the same. They have very few goods that they take with them into the afterlife. Nobody seems to have anything really fancy. Everybody seems to be buried roughly about the same way. Sometimes you might see in anthropology the term band as a word to describe an egalitarian group. There's some pushback against the term band, and then I'm going to tell you about the term tribe as well, which has been pushed back against. But in the literature, band is roughly about 20 to 50 people. So this is, obviously bigger than a family. This may be several families, depending on how much reproduction is going on. The band typically forages. They're hunter-gatherer folks. Very early Egypt, lots of this, multiple bands existing in lots of places in ancient Egypt when it was wetter, before the 3rd millennium BC. So many of these people survive by hunting, picking up food as they travel. Typically, the leadership works through consensus. Hey, what do you think? Should we go hunting over there next week? Well, I don't know. What do you think? I felt like we went hunting there last time. It didn't work out as well. But I think we should go over here. Well, I'm feeling pretty good about that. So the leadership kind of works by getting everybody to agree with the general plan of the group. No one person dominates. No one person's voice is able to push aside other people and say, you be quiet. Your opinion doesn't count. Typically in a band egalitarian organization, a lot of what happens to maintain order is shaming. When people break the rules, when they break the norms, they are ridiculed, they are laughed at. A famous study of Cherokee law that was done several years ago by an American scholar pointed out that the Cherokee Indians living in bands, and some larger groupings as well, but mostly the bands, typically the norm was a lawbreaker got laughed at. They were shunned. They were shamed. So the power of ridicule was what kept the peace, what kept the law. And you see that in these smaller groupings where it's easier because it's face-to-face relationships, and I know you and you know me and we're connected. And, if I've done something wrong and you're like, how dare you, you terrible person, you, it's a lot easier to feel that ridicule and that shame. Um, Kinship is very strong because these bands are large groupings of families. And so people are linked together through their kin relations. And that helps mark who you are. It gives you a place in society. I belong to so and so. It also means that bands have to look sometimes outside of the band to find mates, and different groups have rules about this, who you can marry and who you can't marry. We see that in American Indians. We'll see that in lots of other places around the world, defining who is fair game for marriage. And then typically bands have very little notion of property. They don't see land as something they own because you don't stay there very long. You follow the game, The game are all like trekking down the road, so you're going to follow them, and you're like, bye camp. It was nice having fun. And because you move, you don't have a lot of stuff to carry around. You've got your prized possession. Oh, I got to take this with me, but it's going to be small. It's going to be portable. So property is not as important, personal property or landed property. So the term tribe is problematic for lots of reasons. You still see it in textbooks, you still see it in the literature, but tribe has this association with uncivilized and savage, and it's often been used that way in the 18th, 19th, early 20th centuries. So some people are not as comfortable with using this word as they say maybe another word that indicates a less politically organized society. Typically, tribes are related to a common ancestor. Whether that common ancestor actually was real or not, the people in the tribe believe that they are related. And there may be within the tribe groups that look back to certain specific ancestors who founded their family dynasty. We call those clans. Among the Cherokee, for example, the clans could be wolf, or deer, or twisted hair. And so don't necessarily think of it as like a person. It could be like an image, an animal that represents your common origin as a group of people. Tribes could be in the thousands. So it's a big jump from a band, 20 to 50, to a tribe with thousands of folks. But that does leave open the door that a tribe could be in any number of forms, a tribe of like 200, maybe thousands as well. Tribes are much more open to the idea of horticulture, that is some farming going on, as well as the raising of animals, some domestic usage of animals like cattle, for example. We saw that in one of your earlier lectures on ancient Egypt, where you talked about a group of folks who did actually have cattle and a cattle cult. And so there's clear evidence there that they're familiar with domesticated animals and they're utilizing domesticated animals. But they might move throughout the course of the year from place to place. A tribe does not necessarily live in a settled location, though it could. It might just do a settled location for half the year when it's growing crops, and then move for the other half of the year when it's time to get to the next location that's going to be better for the cows, for example. So you do see both. Ownership of property. Tribes, I don't want you to think like a deed and we sign the deed and we hand it over cash and now I own this. This belongs to me. Think of it more as like this is territory that the tribe controls, or the lineage in that tribe, the wolf lineage or the deer lineage or whatever you want to call the lineage, that they control that property as well. Probably the best example I can think of is like if you've ever had a place on the playground that you and your posse, this was your spot, that you went to. I mean, you didn't own it, but there was the sense of territoriality. It belonged to you. This is where you guys sat. This is your space. And tribes often exercise that kind of ownership of property, where they control an area, it belongs to them, but there's no sense in which they feel like they physically own the land through a deed that they've signed. But there's a clear sense it belongs to them. Tribes typically have a leader who is there because he is the strongest or the smartest. He seems to have the most wisdom or the best connection to the gods, sometimes called a headman or a big man. He's the big guy on campus. Everybody listens to him. He's in power, though, solely because he seems to have good decisions and he seems to know what the right thing is to do. The headman or the big man is not a hereditary position, and his is not the only voice in the tribe. Other people have leadership, and they're able to exercise control over where the tribe goes and what it does, because the big man doesn't dominate. He has no power, no formal power to say, this is what I want, this is what you're going to do, now obey me. He can't do that. So a lot of leadership is still by consensus, even if you've got one guy who seems to be the leading spokesperson. The clan typically maintains the law, the right to use force. A good example of this is Native peoples in the United States, where if there is a murder of your clan, the clan uses revenge against the offending clan to get a murder for a murder. So we can sort of reciprocate and balance out. But that's not an individual process. That's not like I decide to retaliate. That's the clan's power to retaliate. There's still ridicule, there's still shaming, but a lot of the disciplinary force comes through the clan itself, the extended family. Keep in mind that this can be female-led. It does not have to be male-led. So we have among Native peoples, for example, descent traced through women and women's voices being powerful, say among the Cherokee Indians of North America. So don't just automatically assume that this is male dominated. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. We do notice that women tend to have more of a voice in societies where agriculture is powerful, because many of the farmers are actually the women. And so a woman's contribution to the tribe is through her ability to grow crops that keep people alive. And a man contributes through his ability to hunt. And so they together, the complementarian nature of their roles, enable survival for everybody. So don't automatically think this is all about men and male domination, because it doesn't have to be that way. So that's been our look at relatively egalitarian or relatively equal societies in the ancient world. Next time we get together for a lecture, I'll be looking at more complex forms, and we'll talk about ways that these groups merge and greater organization till we get to the rise of ancient states. So I'll see you next time.